Night pressed close against the tower of the hand, a black weight of stone and heat and the slow, sour breath of kings landing rising from the alleys like some living thing. A small wind worried the shutters and rattled a loose hinge, and the fire in the hearth had burned to a low red bowl. Eddard Stark sat with his injured leg stretched out, the ache in it like a stubborn tooth never wholly forgotten, the weight of a decision still warm on his tongue. Every oath took shape in the chest before it was spoken. This one had formed with a thickness that felt unlike the clean chill of honor. It felt like a vice closing on his ribs. Petyr Baelish's shadow had not yet left the room, though the man himself had bowed and slipped away with that slight amused tilt at his mouth, the fox in the fold. Eddard watched the door after it closed, listened to the clink of a guard's sword shift in its scabbard outside, listened to the house groan as it settled, to the city's ceaseless lullaby of wheels and hooves and laughter where men had no business laughing tonight. The king was dead. Robert, who had called him brother and spoken in thunderous jokes and boasts, who had clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to move his bones, lay on satin and cedar and spices and would soon lie in something colder than cedar. The boar had torn him and wine had sweetened the pain, and now the songs would sweeten it further until it became a golden memory, and the truth of it, the sad middle-aged bloat, the weariness, the loss, would be eaten by verses. "Snow," Eddard said softly, and noticed his mistake and felt the old pang, as if he had called the wrong child to him by a name he had never spoken in this city. He rubbed his brow and leaned forward into the fire's red light. The plan had been laid before him, not like a blade but like a curtain to draw. Keep the boy on the throne. Let the wolf wear a lambskin until winter. Bear the lie a while, and while bearing it, gather steel and certain friends and truths so hard and heavy they could not be bent. Keep the girls safe. He could see Arya's scowl at the thought, the set of her chin when challenged, the way she set her heels when Syrio made her hold a posture until her muscles shook. He could see Sansa as she had looked at Joffrey the first weeks, lit from within by whatever dream she had been fed since cradle. There were other lives besides his honor. He had told Catelyn once that he was not made for Southron games. She had smiled that small knowing smile of hers and told him no one ever was, until they were already playing them. Honor was cold, winter hard, the kind of thing that made a man stand up when the hall demanded a kneel. But winter taught other lessons too. How to keep a child from freezing, how to skin the stag and salt the meat when the snow fell and there would be no hunting for months. He had not told Petyr Baelish that language. He had only said yes with his eyelids and felt the ash on his tongue. He reached and pulled the bell cord. A servant came as quiet as smoke, a narrow, long-faced boy with quick hands. "Summon Lord Baelish and Lord Varys," Eddard said. "And Janos Slint to the yard door. I'll see him there." "My Lord Hand," the boy said. "And Tomard," Eddard added. "And Fat Tom. And Jack's den of ink where the keepers hide their wax. Waken them." The boy went, fleet, and Eddard eased himself to standing. The leg complained. It was a dull, steady anger, like a northerner offended at some trivial Southron slight but too tired to argue. He braced his hand on the chair's carved back and breathed. There was a taste of iron at the back of his throat, ghost of the blood he had swallowed when Jaime Lannister's men had jostled him into cobbles and kicked the life from Jory. The memory rose and fell like breath. Jory's face, the sudden spurt, the ragged sound a man makes when his chest is opened. He would remember it as long as memory had a place to live. Littlefinger came first, casually robed, the sort of carelessness that said he had been awake anyway with accounts or thoughts. He glided in like a question mark and leaned against the post of the door. "Your Grace," he said, half a jest for the title he knew to be a knife at this hour. "Do not," Eddard told him, tired. "I am too old for jests when I am at work." A beat of silence, then a little incline of the head. "Then we work." Varys drifted after, lantern in hand, his slippers making a secret's footfall. He smelled faintly of lavender. "My Lord Hand," he murmured. "My grief remains with yours for the king. He was—" "Robert," Eddard said, and that was answer enough. He did not want to hear what men would say of Robert now, what sort of polished phrases would be in fashion in the corridors by morning. We keep the realm from tearing. If that means the boy wears the crown, then the boy wears the crown. Littlefinger's eyes lit with a cool amusement that did not reach warmth. Varys's lashes folded down and up again in a slow blink, as if he had expected it all along, which made Eddard angry for reasons that had nothing to do with the choice. Then, Varys said gently, "We must act with a grace that makes the lie handsome." "It is not a lie," Eddard said. He was startled to hear himself. "It is a mower's patience. It is keeping the sickle oiled." He paused and tasted words. "The will remains," he said more quietly. "Robert named me protector of the realm. And that protects only you until a lion finds a way around the parchment," Littlefinger murmured. "Cersei has a talent for eating vellum and calling it bread. She will be Queen Regent," Eddard said. "The council will advise the boy as law says. I will sit as hand. No change in the faces, only in the tempers. The city must wake to continuity, not shock." Varys set down his lantern on the side table and folded his hands upon his belly. "There is wisdom in the plainness of that, and the small folk love a thing that appears as it was yesterday. We are a nation of poor memories for ugly changes." "We will summon the council at dawn," Eddard said. "Before that, Janos Slynt. I would speak with him." Littlefinger's mouth bent. "Always better to speak to the man who owns the dogs, rather than the dogs." He tapped a finger at the chair where Eddard had Saturday. "You will want the city watch for the coronation. Loyalty smells dear in a city like this. It must be perfumed with gold." "I will be done with perfumes." Eddard's eyes went to Varys by habit when he said, "We shall do a distasteful thing," as if the man's pallor absolved the ugliness of the deed. "The watch will keep the peace. That is all I ask." "And perhaps to do nothing," Littlefinger said pleasantly. "At the moment it would be most tempting to do something, a talent I have always admired in honest men." Janos Slynt was hauled from his bed and came, red-eyed and resentful, then quickly jovial when he saw who waited. He made bows as if he were selling them. "Janos," Eddard began, "and let the man's name sit between them like a loaf. Tomorrow the city will see a crown on Joffrey's head. The watch must keep order, calmly, with an open face. If any man, noble or gutter rat, attempts to stir disorder, you will quiet him. I am Lord Hand, quiet as snow." Slynt's smile flashed and showed a piggish tooth. "All as you command." "You will take your orders from the Hand and from the Queen Regent," Eddard said. He heard the iron in his own tone, surprised by it, as if he were speaking to some stubborn bannerman at Moat Cailin. "And when you do not have orders, you will do nothing. Do you hear me, Lord Janos? Not your captains, not your friends, not your purse. You will do nothing until you have instruction." Lord Janos glanced past Eddard for a heartbeat, eyes going to Littlefinger, as if to be measured. "As you say," he said with outward ease. "The gold cloaks march to your drum." Petyr yawned delicately. "We should drum softly. Drums in the night make men arm themselves for wars that do not yet exist." When they were done with Slynt and with the wax and the scribes and with breached messengers sent into darkness, Eddard dismissed them all but Varys, and for a time they listened to the fire. "Will you tell Stannis?" Varys asked at last, so gently it might have been a nurse asking if the child wanted more milk. The eunuch's eyes remained mild on the flames. Eddard felt in his body the turning point again, the juncture like a branching of a river. In one channel, cold, hard law. In another, meandering time. "Not yet," he said. The words were ash and they were relief. "There is much to mend first. When my daughter can walk the streets without a Lannister staring to count her steps. When Tywin calls off his dogs. When the realm is not one spark from burning. I will send for Stannis and give him such proofs that the wind cannot blow them." "And if the wind learns to blow gold?" Varys asked. "It does in this city." "Then," Eddard said, "we will stone the pockets." Varys's smile was faint and not unkind. "There is a mercy in you, even in this. The realm may not deserve it." They parted before dawn. The sky beyond the shutter slats was a pale, indifferent slate. The city had not ceased all night, only changed the quality of its noise. the revelers had dwindled, and the butchers and bakers took their place, banging and murmuring and rolling their life's weight toward market. He closed his eyes against it and saw the yard of Winterfell, the breath of horses, the hush before a snow, and wanted for a wild instant to call Robb a boy again and send him to the kitchens for honey, to watch Bran climb where he oughtn't, to hear Jon laugh low with Benjen. He opened his eyes and found himself a man. By morning the Red Keep had rearranged itself into ceremony. The steps were scrubbed to a sour cleanliness that did not erase what had been spilled there over the centuries. The banners along the gallery were new enough to smell of dye. Eddard dressed as plain as his place allowed, the dire wolf on gray, no jewels, his hair tied back, the bandages hidden beneath a clean boot that could not disguise his limp. Cersei came to the hall with the gravity of a woman who knows how to walk into a room and make it appear she had always been there. Tommen fussed with a sleeve. Myrcella's hair had been wound like gold rope. And Joffrey had the restless glare of a colt who has not been broken properly. The crown on the cushion looked heavier than his neck. The small folk crowded in the back of the hall, a damp press of bodies, the smell of them rising like its own incantation. The great lords of the city arranged themselves in the tiers with the calculation of men in a game who had discovered new rules in the night. Renly was not among them. Mace Tyrell was in the Reach. Stannis was on Dragonstone. The rest were not enough to make what was about to happen a feast for the law. It would be a meal of convenience. Eddard stood a step below the dais. The silence wanted something. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, Grand Maester Pycelle intoned. King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, has passed from this mortal coil. His voice was thin, dry as paper. He spoke of the boar as if it were a metaphysical question. He spoke of healers and God's will. He spoke for too long. When the crown was lifted and the boy reached, Cersei's hand guided his wrist. The metal settled with a faint knock against bone. Joffrey's face went tight for a blink, then proud with borrowed weight. "All kneel," the herald cried. Eddard knelt with the rest. He had knelt to his father's bier and to his king in the snow. He had knelt to pray to a tree that bled where he could not bleed. He knelt now on polished stone with 100 treacheries watching. He felt every eye like a finger on his neck. "Your Grace," he said when it was his turn to rise and speak. His voice did not crack. "The realm grieves your father. It looks to you. We who serve the crown will serve you, and keep your peace, and hold you safely to manhood, by the law of the land and the mercy of the gods." Cersei's chin lifted the fraction of an inch that admitted satisfaction. Joffrey's mouth tilted in a smile too sharp for a child. "Rise, Lord Stark," the boy said. "Rise, hand." He rose. He did not look to Sansa to see her face lit. He did not look to Arya to see her disapproval. He kept his eyes a steady gray in a hall that wanted color. After, the small council met in a chamber that smelled of beeswax and pears. The window was a slit that turned the day to a narrow blade. Varys found his warm corner. Petyr took his usual chair as if he had always owned it. Pycelle arranged his sleeves. Cersei sat where the regent's presence made all other chairs small. "We will have order," she said without preamble, and looked at Eddard as if order were a thing that could be handed to a man like a jug. "My son is king. The Riverlands are in chaos. Your wife has abducted my brother. Your bannermen are slaying mine in the river's bends. My wife acted on what she believed was an attempt on my son's life," Eddard said. "It was a poor defense. It was all he had. I have sent ravens requiring Lord Hoster to treat Tyrion as guest under compulsion of royal command. The man will be freed." Pycelle coughed and half rose with the effort. "If he is not already consumed by Tully tempers," he murmured, then smoothed his beard, as if that had excused the impropriety of making suggestion of it. "Lord Tywin will not be mollified by paper," Cersei said. "Lord Tywin," Eddard returned evenly, "commands men who have put villages to the torch under the banner of House Lannister without the king's leave. If he cares for the king's grace, he will call his dogs home." Something sharpened in Cersei's gaze. "Dogs have masters," she said softly. "So do wolves." Varys's fingers fluttered as if catching a moth. Let us not too quickly pursue metaphors down passages from which we cannot return, he breathed. Lord Eddard is right that the small folk must see peace on the roads. If a royal party were to ride with banners and pardons to the war's edge and soften hearts that have felt hard iron, it might be thought that his grace brings a spring of mercy. Petyr smiled. Varys would have the boy go on a hunt for virtue. Better perhaps to send a trusted chief of the household. The hand, say, with letters and gold to salve fresh wounds. Peace bought cheap is peace nonetheless. And leave the city's peace in whose hands? Cersei's look told him whom she meant. You would carry my son's crown to old men and beggars and ask them to touch it as if it were a saint's bone. If Tywin marches, it will be over your letters. Then the crown will answer with law, Eddard said. He forced his hands flat upon the table so they would not curl into fists. It is law for a lord who wages war on his lawful king to be named traitor. I will give Lord Tywin a better title. I will give him Father of the King in place of traitor, if his men quit the Riverlands and come to court. The words unfolded of themselves. He wondered, in a part of him that watched himself as if from a tower, when he had learned to say them. Robert had taught him to stare down men who thought themselves alone in their courage. The Starks of old had taught him that a lord must speak plainly where wolves might hear. Cersei's lip moved as if to shape a smile. We shall see, she said. Write your letter. Seal it with my son's seal. We will send it on swift horses. We will send a second to Riverrun. We will see what names return to us by Raven. Eddard felt the smallest, strangest breath of relief. Not victory. Merely the staving off of a collapse that had seemed to come in each hour like a spring flood. After council, Sansa found him in the corridor where the high windows showed only narrow sky. She came with Septa Mordane fluttering behind like a nervous hen, and Eddard thought with a surprising stab of how the walls of Winterfell had altered even small things. Sansa had run there with her hair unbound, clutching a kitten, not with a septa. The city made mothers of girls. Sansa's eyes were the bright blue of an honest sky. They had not learned to cloud yet. Father, she said, breathless and shining. He was so brave. He did not look frightened at all. Did he? He wore the crown, Eddard said. He glanced at Mordane, who folded her hands and stepped back a pace, pretending privacy in a place where every stone had ears. Bravery we shall teach him, if the gods will. Sansa broke into a girlish laugh and then stopped herself with an effort, as if she remembered she was meant to be a queen someday. Joffrey will be a great king, she said, and the words, for a heartbeat, were not only longing. She was very beautiful in that instant, his child, small and tall at once. Great kings learn mercy before they learn war, Eddard said. The words were a rebuke to no one in particular and landed between them like a thing inadvertently dropped. Arya appeared as if conjured, slipping from a crook of corridor with Syrio Farrell at her shadow. Sweat had darkened the collar of her tunic. Her hair was a snarl that refused a lady's hands. She stared at Sansa as if that shining face were a kind of betrayal. Eddard prayed for patience and asked the gods to give him better prayers. You knelt? Arya said at him, as if she could not help saying it. To him. So did I, Sansa said sharply, stung. As we all must. You wanted to, Arya accused. I did not, Sansa lied, and flushed for the lie at once. So prettily Eddard almost smiled. Syrio bowed with his hands pressed together. A good day for balance, he murmured. We have this wind. He had a bravosy way of making truths sound like lessons or lessons sound like truths. Go wash, Eddard told Arya. Then eat. Then train if you must. But no exhaustion today. He turned to Sansa. You will not go near the knights today. The yard is for men with tempers, and today the city's temper is thin. If you walk, walk with 3 guards. Do you hear me? I hear, Sansa said. Arya rolled her eyes and then checked herself under Syrio's glance. He left them with the uneasy sense that each daughter was a drum that beat in his chest to different measures. When he looked up, he saw Varys at the far end of the passage, speaking softly to a pair of slender boys whose eyes were far too old. The eunuch saw him see and made a tiny, helpless gesture, as of a man who cannot entirely stop water from finding its slope. By dusk, the ravens had flown. By midnight, the first rumor was already coiling the city's alleys like a cat after fish guts. The rumor said that the hand had promised Tywin a crown of lilies, and that a lily meant a sword with its points bent. The rumor said the queen had kissed the hand in the council chamber and left a stain of wine on his cheek that he did not wipe for an hour. The rumor said that the king had cried after the crown was on, and that he had bit his own tongue so hard he bled on the gold. Rumor's mouth was 1,000 mouths. Eddard, having seen none of those things and done none, went to bed at last and dreamt of snow blowing the other way, against the grain, as if winter would not be persuaded by any man's will. On the third morning, Tyrion Lannister won his voice back from the mountain's long echo and laughed into it. The Eyrie was clean as a wound, and the sky cells had an honesty to them that he appreciated even as he despised them. There was no lying about the sky opening beyond half a wall. He stretched his legs on his pallet and told Bronn, "We're leaving," as if he'd decided to go early from a party. "And if the lady will not give you her leave?" Bronn asked, amused and yawning. "She will," Tyrion said, "because her sister will tell her that somewhere a letter has been sealed with a red wax that frightens her more than the truth." He had seen Lysa Arryn's eyes when the raven had come. He had heard the scratch of her thoughts like a mouse in a cupboard. They collected their things, such as they were, and Tyrion collected a last sardonic bow for the guards who had come to love hating him. And when he was escorted to the high hall and set before the seat where Lysa sat with her child, he discovered that his guesswork had become prophecy. Lysa's mouth was hard and thin. The boy at her breast fixed on Tyrion with an open, infant stare. "You will go," she said, "but not as my friend. You will go under my letter to my father begging him to remember the blood that flows in my son." "Ah," Tyrion said, "blood. Such a difficult gardener it makes." "Go," she said again, and the guards moved and the air moved and Tyrion walked, his head buzzing with the change in the shape of what would happen next. He had always loved a moment where the map folded wrong and made a new country out of the old, so long as he could stand where the fold did not crease him. In King's Landing, Eddard received ravens from none of the men he most needed. There was silence from Casterly Rock and silence from Dragonstone. And from Riverrun there came a careful letter from Hoster Tully that spoke of health and weather and supplies and said nothing about his daughters or the road from the Vale. He read it twice and could hear his wife's displeasure raging at the paper, not at him. Catelyn's anger had always been of the honest kind that burned on behalf of a thing rather than against a person. He held the parchment a long time before setting it aside. Court Joffrey found his voice. He liked the sound of it. He liked the way it carried and how men had to lean into it. He called for tournaments with a hunger that glowed on his face, and Cersei promised him that tournaments would come, when the realm had a warm blanket again. He demanded that the heads of all men who had spoken against him be mounted on spikes. Cersei laughed and called him fierce and then spoke softly until he forgot, which was a kind of mercy. Eddard watched each small cruelty like a bird on the worm. If cruelty were a weed and not a tree, it could be pulled. He told himself he believed it. On the fifth day, a rider with a dust-choked face and a red ribbon at his arm came in through the Lion Gate and demanded audience. The guard's spear but thumped the stones in a rhythm that said there would be news whether a man wanted milk or vinegar. Eddard went to the solar where Cersei had arranged herself among green silk the color of an apple's breath and took the letter. He broke the seal. He did not offer it to her yet. Lord Tywin's hand was a strong one. The writing was neat and without visible rage. It demanded nothing. It assumed. It acknowledged the troublesome misunderstanding that had led to certain regrettable actions in the Riverlands. It expressed the Lord of Casterly Rock's admiration for the hand's prudence and the Queen Regent's beauty, which was a kind of threat. It announced that Tyrion Lannister had been freed at the Eyrie, and that his father would be most pleased to present him at court as a sign of loyalty, were it not that the Riverlands had been, of late, hospitable to banditry, and that a noble lord must attend to his people. "He will not come," Eddard said. Cersei's mouth curved. "Not yet," she said. "He is as patient as winter in his way." A glance. You thought he would declare, did you not? And now he writes. He writes because he can, and because you made him able to with your kneel. I knelt to a boy, Eddard said. Not to a father. How charming, she said. That night he dreamed again of Winterfell. The godswood was so quiet his breath became too loud. He knelt before the heart tree with its bleeding face and said, in the dream, not words but a shape of need, and the tree opened its eyes wider, and the sap ran, and he realized with a start that the blood at its mouth was his. He woke before dawn with his hand at his throat. He went to the yard at first light and watched Tommen feed a fat pony a slice of apple. The boy's hand was careful. The pony's lips tickled his palm and he giggled as a child ought, and Eddard's heart tightened. My lord hand, Ser Barristan Selmy said behind him. If I may. You may always, Eddard said without turning. He had a sudden desire to turn and ask Barristan about the days when he had guarded men who did not tear the world with their hungers. But those days had their own hungers. No age was innocent. The old knight's hair was as white as the sun at noon. It hurt the eyes a little to look at. Do not teach a boy to kneel who is not taught to stand first, Selmy said, and his voice had no reproach in it. It is the advice of a swordsman, not a counselor. You may find it ill-suited to the work at hand. Advice is a thing a man may wear or not, Eddard said. I thank you for bringing it, Ser Barristan. He found himself, in those days of cups half filled and tempers half spilled, doing work that made no noise, changing the name on a writ so that it did not shame a house, sending a small purse to a shipwright whose dock had burned in a fight between men who wore the wrong colors, moving a family from Flea Bottom to a decent alley because the father had died on the city wall under Jon Arryn's hand and nobody had noticed. The realm liked to shape itself in blows and banners. It was kept together rather more often with bread and parchment and a man's time. On the 7th day, Renly's raven arrived and brought nothing but absence. He had left with the Knight of Flowers for Storm's End, said the careful hand from the steward there, and he would not be returning to court for the foreseeable. The words did not say why. They did not need to. Petyr Baelish's mouth bent when he read the copy. Renly has always believed a crown is a hat that must be worn at the correct angle. He has gone to take one from a shelf and try it before a mirror. And Mace Tyrell will bring him a comb, Varys murmured. One must not underestimate the love of a mother for a son, or a lord for the notion that his daughter might be queen. Your spider's webs must sing with how many moths? Petyr said lightly. I half think you hear them change direction in the night. Varys folded his hands into his sleeves. Sometimes moths fly where the light is brightest. It is not subtlety to observe that. Cersei took the news with an expression so composed that Eddard might have believed she had planned it, if he had been a different sort of man. Let the reach preen, she said. We hold the capital. Stannis is in his island, sulking behind law. My father writes letters with an ink made of other men's fear. We have the throne and the boy upon it. Let them call us names if they like. Names are eaten by the bellies of grown children. At supper, Eddard found Arya picking at a trencher and scowling. Sansa was speaking with such brimming courtesy to a knight of the Kingsguard that even the knight looked embarrassed at the brightness. What is wrong? Eddard asked Arya when they slipped into a corner where September's heat had found a small draft. She, Arya muttered, jerking her chin at her sister. And him, she added, and jabbed a thumb toward the dais where Joffrey, irresistible to himself, had stood and spoken loudly about how he would lead a hunt in the Kingswood and run a stag so fat it would feed 100 men. And everyone who is pretending. We pretend to keep the floor from cracking, Eddard said. We pretend until the stone sets. He had not meant to say it like that. He sounded like someone else, a man from a hot city with an easy tongue. He was startled to see Arya look at him as if he had given her a blade. Then teach me to pretend, she said, fierce and low. Syrio says a sword can be a lie in your hand and the truth in someone else's throat. He touched the back of her hand with his fingers. The bones there were delicate as a bird's. Eat, he said, then sleep. You will need your small strength for what you want to be. And what is that? She demanded. and in her demanding there was the ghost of a laugh she would not give. "Alive," he said. "In the Riverlands the fires died down because there was nothing left nearby to burn. Rivers carried ash like a new silt. The men sent by the crown to call Beric Dondarrion back disappeared into that churned country like stones into a millpond, leaving only rings that spread and were swallowed." Lord Tywin sat at a table in a room half-finished and ate roast beef with his knife and listened to the reports with a gaze polite as a butcher's. When Tyrion found him, the hall was too large for the number of men within it and filled with the clang of hammers from outside. "Father," Tyrion said, and bowed with feeling both genuine and not. "Your raven did not say what victory you wished me to bring." "News," Tywin said, "is victory enough if it is true?" His eyes took the measure of his son and accepted him as one might accept a tool one had thought mislaid. "Sit. Eat. Then we will speak of dogs and leashes." "Ah," Tyrion said, "the hand wrote of leashes too." He climbed to the bench with the practiced ease of a man who had climbed too many benches that were made for men with longer legs. "King's Landing has decided to be patient." He smiled, unable to help himself. "It is a novel experiment. I look forward to the results." Tywin regarded him for long seconds. "The hand has decided to put his head in the lion's mouth and trust the beast to behave. He forgets that hunger is not the beast's fault but its nature. Cersei will eat him if I do not, and if neither of us do, some other beast will come and try its teeth. Perhaps he thinks to feed the beast while it grows tame," Tyrion suggested. "He has daughters he cares for very much, which is what men will cut from him first," Tywin said. The matter-of-factness of it made Tyrion's mead taste like water. In the city, it was the small things that shifted first. Men at the Street of Steel began forging fewer spearheads and more hinges. The wharf men grumbled that fewer barrels of Tarbeck wine had arrived and more sacks of grain. A boy in Flea Bottom ran with a turnip stolen out of a widow's basket and was beaten by 2 other boys for daring to run in a street where they had decided running would bring notice. The Silent Sisters went through their rituals on a bier that held a man whose name had been shouted during Joffrey's coronation and silenced afterward and never spoken again. A singer invented a song about a wolf that carried a lamb in its belly and could not tell if the animal inside it made it hungrier or gentler. He sang it once and then thought better of singing it again. Eddard attended to matters that left no marks in ballads. He changed the bakery's levy by 1 measure of flour because the old baker had died and his son had more sense than greed. He arranged for a patrol along the Rosby Road and sent a letter to Rosby itself, inquiring after a marriage that had been whispered about too long. He did not sleep as a man should. When he closed his eyes, he saw snow melt on a steel blade and drip in slow beads, and each bead had a face in it, and the faces were sometimes his daughters and sometimes the faces of boys without names. On the 10th day, a caravan from the Reach came in, and with it a young lord with an overlarge plume and a smile like an oatcake. The city found itself briefly in love with plumes again, as if fashion were a raft to cross a river that ran too fast. With the caravan came whispers that Renly had convened bannermen at Bitterbridge. The whispers uncoiled under doors and in kitchens and at a gaming table where Petyr sat very late and lost a small amount of silver to a man he had always intended to lose a small amount of silver to. The next dawn, Varys came to Eddard's solar with an expression that took work to smooth. "My lord," he murmured, and set a small roll of vellum on the table with 2 fingers. "A fire in the Street of Sisters last night. 5 dead, the baker and his sons. No evidence save a painted woman who says she saw men with red cloths at their throats." "Red cloths," Eddard said. He looked at the wax. He did not yet touch it. "What does a red cloth mean this week?" "It means," Varys said softly, "that someone wants us to think of the Riverlands even while we decide to think of the city." Eddard felt rage rise in him cleanly, almost sweet. It was a relief to be angry at something so ordinary as murder. "We will find them," he said. "We will find someone," Varys corrected without malice. "That too is a kind of keeping order." Eddard's hand closed around the vellum. He thought of Robert then with startling clarity, not as king or friend but as a boy who had once thrown a stone into a pond and laughed at the rings. The rings lay upon the surface still. He broke the seal and found within a maid's small neat letters in a hand he knew. It was a letter sent through a friend of a friend, smuggled in a roll of linen. It said simply that Catelyn had left the Vale and was traveling toward Riverrun by slow ways with Tyrion gone his own, that the road was dangerous, that she missed his voice, that Robb was as tall as Brandon had been at that age, and that the Godswood in Winterfell had a bird nesting late this year as if the season had been refused its usual order. He read it until the letters wanted to blur and did not let them. He pressed his fingers to the paper as if heat might find his skin and cross. The city breathed. It breathed in spices and let out smoke. It breathed in pilgrims to a throne and let out men with bloody knuckles. Eddard began to learn how to read the wind there, where wind meant rumor and bread smell and the distant tramp of feet that belonged to men who had sworn oaths at dawn and forgot them by noon. When Joffrey's first decree came, a silly thing, a boy's thing, to outlaw some common game of dice that had offended him because he had seen men laughing at what he did not understand, Eddard rewrote it with Cersei's consent so that it became, instead, a tax on the game's winnings, enough to fill a few coffers quietly. Joffrey preened at his cunning and demanded to see how much coin his wisdom brought before sunset, and when none of the clerks could oblige, he beat the nearest dog with a stick until the hound took the stick from him with 2 fingers and broke it in 2. That night, Eddard sat with Sandor Clegane on a gallery that looked down at the training yard and listened to him drink. "You put the boy on a short chain," Sandor observed. "He pulls. A dog's lesson." "I have never been fond of chaining pups," Eddard said, and sorry for the way the man's face twitched, as if in pain at the mention of puppies. "But I will not let him bite children to learn he has teeth." "He will bite something," Sandor said. "His mother tells him the meat is his. The cooks tell him it is ready. You tell him to wait. One day the meat will not be there anymore, and we will see what he bites then." He drank, his mouth twisted. "You put your head in a place where there is only fire." Eddard thought, not for the first time, that wisdom had strange homes. On the 12th day, a septon mounted on a barrel in the market began to preach that the new king had been born with a crown of knives inside him, and that the knives would cut his own mother first. He preached the text of the fools, a language that men who had lost too much understood immediately. The watch hauled him down and boxed his ears and put him in a cell. The market forgot him in a day and moved on to melons. For days later, a man with cleaner hands than any in Flea Bottom and a ring barely hidden beneath his sleeve came to the septon at night and told him that if he would preach a new sermon in the morning that praised the Queen's fairness, he might find his nose improved by the gold needed to keep him from the cells. Men made bargains with hunger and the fear of hunger. That too was law. Ravens began to bring different kinds of news. A quiet rumor reached the court that Stannis had hired sails. A louder rumor said that a red woman had lit a fire on Dragonstone that burned too brightly for the fog. Eddard knew the shape of Stannis Baratheon's mind as one might know the shape of an axe by the mark it left. He felt in his chest the old, impossible war begin again, between right and good, between the North's law and the city's necessity. He told himself there would be time to make those 2 roads meet. Night, morning. He began to count their alternation like beads and lost the number. He wrote to Luwin and told him to tell Robb to stay and to hold and to keep the wolves well fed. He wrote that word twice and did not know which wolves he meant. He sent gold to the Riverlands that would not reach the men who needed it because gold went astray in a city like this, and he accepted that, then sent more. He kept the watch's captains close and gave them nothing to decide on their own. He let Pycelle drone and found what he needed in his droning. He let Petyr jest and seized the kernel of truth the jester's nut had hidden. He listened to Varys and tried not to become a man who listened to Varys. He went to the Godswood of the Red Keep and found it a pale mockery. The trees were meek, a southern sort, and their leaves whispered without memory. He knelt there anyway because men kneel where they can and because the kneeling did something to his heart that tightened it into a shape he could bear. The words he said were the words he had been taught as a boy when snow fell and a man could hear it fall. He said them without shame. When he left, he felt he had done something like taking a breath underwater and not drowning. On a day hard with sunlight, Cersei came to his solar without warning. She closed the door behind her and stood with the window's blade of day across her cheek like a strange blush. "Do not send another letter to my father," she said without preface. "He hears only himself. If you must scratch at the world, scratch somewhere that bleeds." "If he hears only himself," Eddard said, "the world will need a hoe to cut his roots." "You cannot hoe stone," she said. "You must wait for a frost." She took a step closer. Her scent was green apple and something cut. "You did a clever thing," she said almost idly. "I had thought you incapable of those. You saved your daughters for today. Perhaps you have saved them for a month. But for a year? For 2? Her eyes held his with a kind of honesty that was almost more insulting than her lies. "You cannot save anything for very long in this city. It all rots faster here. Winter preserves," he said. "This is not winter." The smile she gave him was very small and very poisonous. "This is a fever." When she had gone, he stood for a long time with his hand on the table's edge and felt the throb of his leg and the throb of his decision like 2 hammers striking different stones. He was very tired. He did not sit. That evening he watched Arya spar with Syrio and saw in the girl's leaps and lunges the narrow insistence of a reed that will not be broken by a stream. When she missed, Syrio said nothing. He only moved his own feet and made the space available for a truth that had not existed a moment before. That was how a man might keep a boy on a throne, Eddard thought with a desperate sort of humor. That was how one might keep a fire from eating a hall. Not by taking the flame in both hands and trying to smother it, but by moving its air, by building a hearth. There were arts here he had never desired to learn. Yet he learned. The first true messenger from Dragonstone came on a lean horse that had seen too much water. The man's cloak smelled of salt and smoke. He brought a letter written in a hand too neat to belong to a soldier. Stannis's words were counted, austere. He named himself rightful king. He named Joffrey a bastard. He named the queen an adulteress. He named the law his sword. He named Eddard Stark in the letter as a man who had once served law. The names lay in lines like stones in a wall. Eddard read it in silence. Then again. He did not let the air into his voice when he spoke. "Has this been sent to other lords?" The messenger swallowed. "Yes, my lord, to all who might remember the old oaths." Eddard waited until the man had gone before he allowed himself to sit. The chair took him with the sigh of old wood. He looked up to find Varys watching him from the door. "Dragonstone breeds a very hard kind of honesty," Varys murmured. "It has no places to hide." "There is no hiding," Eddard said. "There is only choosing when to be seen." He set the letter down. "We are seen now." "So," Varys said with something like regret, "now the game begins in earnest." "No," Eddard answered, and was surprised to hear the winter in his voice. "Now the game ends for men who think it a game. For the rest of us, life will continue." Varys' smile was quick and sad. "You are a strange hand, Lord Stark." "I am not a hand," Eddard said quietly. "I am a father." That night he went to Sansa and told her she would not walk to the Sept alone tomorrow. She agreed with a sweet, immediate courtesy that made his heart ache. He found Arya in the shadows of the yard practicing cuts on an imaginary foe and told her she would not go to the kitchens after dark again. She scowled and asked him if the darkness were what he feared. He told her no, it was men who would make it darker. He kissed both their hair with a tenderness that came upon him like a fever and went away before they could complain of being treated as children. He slept poorly and dreamed of wolves running on snow that burned, each footprint revealing hot coals beneath. When he woke, his leg ached with a stubbornness that felt like an omen. He told himself omens were for the women in the market with cards. He told himself too many things, perhaps. In the morning the bells took too long to ring. In the morning a fishmonger's boy cried out that he had found a knife under his stall, and that the knife had the lion worked subtly into its hilt. In the morning a washerwoman sang a song about a reed that bent and did not break. In the morning a raven circled once and then, rather than alight at the rookery as it had always been trained to do, beat its wings back out over the city as if pained by what it carried. By noon, Men were saying aloud in wine sinks what Stannis's letter had written. By evening, some of them had been arrested for the saying. The watch moved with a heaviness Eddard did not like. Janos's eyes had grown more calculating, or perhaps Eddard had learned how to read the calculation in them. Cersei received him in a room where the light made cages on the floor and laughed when he asked if she had read the letter. "Every word," she said. "It is very well made. He has a craftsman's hand." "It is the law," Eddard said. "The law is a story we tell to make men do something," she said, her gaze the bright gold of a thing that might bite. "It has worked as a story for centuries. Perhaps now a different story has more listeners." "You will ruin your son with this?" he said, and the pleading in his voice frightened him. "You will ruin him by letting the city become a house built on lies." "Men live in houses built on lies every day," she said. "They call them homes." For a heartbeat he saw the weariness under her skin, the thing that made her jaw hard. Then it was gone. "You chose this," she added. "Do not look at me as if I forced your hand." Eddard stood very still. He could hear, faintly, the city's hum through the stone. He could not hear Winterfell at all. The choice he had made lay beside him like a sick child, and he knew he would sit by it even if it coughed blood. When he left the Queen, the corridor outside seemed full of men who were not there, ghosts of all the roads he might have walked, all the kneelings he might have refused. His limp was worse. He made it to the end of the hall and stopped at the arrow-slit window where men sometimes came to pretend to admire the view. The sky over the city was the color of old bone, and a storm was far off, the heat and hush that came before. He rested his forehead against the cool stone and closed his eyes and breathed the breath of a man who has begun the long walk of a winter he cannot yet see. That night, as if the air itself had decided to change, the wind veered. A ship hoisted by the Blackwater blew its canvas full and beat upriver, its captain refusing a pilot with an arrogance that set the dockmen swearing. Men climbed roofs in Flea Bottom to watch lightning on the horizon that did not come, and a rider galloped in through the mud gate with a stag sewn crudely to his cloak and the look on his face of one who had outrun his news. Eddard learned, sometime near midnight, that Renly Baratheon had been named king in a hall at Bitterbridge with roses underfoot. Roses that had crushed and stained men's shoes red, and that half the Reach had shouted itself hoarse. He learned that Marjorie Tyrell had stood beside Renly with her head bowed like a prayer, and that a ring had been placed where some would put a sword. He learned that banners had been shaken out like picnic cloths, and that wine had been poured into the mouths of men who would die for a green boy with dimples and a pleasant smile, because there is more to banners than cloth. He learned also, in the quiet after the messenger had gone, that Joffrey was a boy whose hands had begun to shake when no one looked, and that Cersei's anger had gone very still, and that Petyr Baelish sat at his table alone and moved a small stone from one corner to another and then back again, and smiled into the empty room, and that Varys went home that night by a different stair and listened at two doors he had never before put his ear to. Eddard went to the window and leaned into the night. The wind tasted faintly of salt. In it he fancied, foolishly, that he could smell snow, though he knew the sea had dressed itself in that scent to trick him. He stood a long time there, with his finger pressed to the pulse at his wrist, and felt the realm beating like a small, frantic bird in his hand. He could not let it fly yet. It would break itself against the first glass. Morning came like an admission. The city woke with two kings and a third who might yet brush ash from his hair and step from his island with a kind of legal fire in his hands. Joffrey sat in the hall and was made to look serene. Cersei was iron. The small council gathered and moved words around as if they were stones for a wall that still had too many gaps. Men in the street began to choose which names to say aloud and which to keep behind their teeth. The Red Keep's kitchens baked too much bread, as if hunger might be assuaged in advance by smell. The watchman on the walls spit to the side and counted arrows and did not know which way to take insult first. Eddard kept to the work in front of him. He sent quiet men he trusted to the prince's apartments to look at the boys when they slept and to listen if their breath hitched. He rearranged the watch so that no captain had a full cohort of his own friends under him. He wrote to Winterfell again and told Bran about a hawk he had once seen that had startled him by the color under its wing. He gave Sansa permission to keep a dog in their chambers if she could find one small enough not to frighten the queen, and she looked for a pup with the intensity of someone seeking a prayer. He sat with Arya on the steps in the shade at noon when the day was a white cloth over the city, and told her a story about Lyanna that he had not meant to tell anyone in King's Landing ever, and when he finished, Arya said, "She sounds like me." And he said, "She was," and they looked at one another and then away. They kept the boy on the throne. The throne kept its knives. Each day the metal warmed a little under the weight of a child who had not grown into it. Each day the room filled with air that carried the scent of storms that had not yet broken. Each day Eddard understood more of what it meant to build a lie sturdy enough to hold many men and women without their falling through. And somewhere east of where the Blackwater changed its mind and remembered it had been a river before it was a road, a man set a fire that burned too clean, and a woman watched it burn with her eyes like coals banked for a night she had chosen, and said a prayer in a language the city did not yet know it would learn. In the Red Keep, Eddard Stark stood at his window again when the hour was very late and the city was a dark bowl. He held Stannis' letter in his hand, and Renly's rumor in his head, and Joffrey's small crown in the heart of a father, and he did not know yet how to set those weights against one another without breaking the scale. He knew only that he had chosen, and that choices had a way of choosing again after they were made, and that the method of keeping a realm whole in summer was not the same as keeping a child alive in winter. He laid the letter on the table and set a candle near its edge and watched the wax slip and pool and harden, and thought that every oath was a hot thing once and a cold thing after, and that a man's work was to hold it long enough not to be burned and not so long as to freeze. The wind moved in the high slit of the window and brought with it the city's breath. It smelled of river and smoke and secrets and horses and bread. Somewhere far below a woman laughed, and somewhere not so far, a man wept and did not let anyone hear. Eddard closed his eyes a moment and lifted his face and felt the warm air on it, and remembered a cold field under a white sky and a snowfall so fine he could not tell where air ended and winter began. When he opened his eyes, the candle had guttered. He pinched the wick, then lit it again. The flame did not argue. It only burned. He took up his quill. Dawn found him awake, the quill's nib browned with dried ink, the page before him a neat plane of words whose carefulness had cost him a night. He sealed the letters one by one with the direwolf's head and pressed them until the wax cooled. To Winterfell, to White Harbor, to Oldcastle and Deepwood and Barrowton, to men he trusted who did not owe their loyalties to courtiers' games. He wrote of the king's death and Joffrey's crowning and the need for patience, for stillness, for the kind of quiet that kept storms from discovering a door. He wrote of wolves that must stay in the wood and keep their bellies full and their teeth sharp, and he trusted that those reading would hear the truth beneath the words. When he rose, his injured leg voiced its complaint like an old hound greeting a master who had been too long away. He tightened the leather about the splint and walked as a Stark should, without hurry, through corridors already awake with servants and smells and the faint bell-like music of a girl laughing 2 courts away. The city below was a soot-colored quilt. Smoke stitched its seams. Varys came before he had broken his fast, slipping into the solar with that ineffable hush that always made Eddard think of snowfall. He folded black-gloved hands and inclined his head just enough to signal sorrow without inviting questions. "My lord Hand," the eunuch murmured, "there is the smallest of matters that wishes to be a large one. May I intrude upon the light?" "You're already in it," Eddard said. "Say it." "The king," Varys said delicately, "is a young man with a young man's temper. He has heard that some in the city whisper an ugly word after his name, and he is bitterly eager to do a man's thing to erase it. He spoke last night, with vigor, of marking heads on spikes so that tongues might learn courtesy." "Who brought him such whispers?" Eddard asked. Varys spread his hands minutely. "Whispers walk on their own legs, but these were lent a mount by a letter from Dragonstone." Eddard rubbed at the bridge of his nose with ink-stained fingers. "You have other news?" Varys's lashes lowered and rose again. "Ifirido." "There is a pattern that has repeated itself twice, which is often how a habit announces its birth. At dusk, a certain house in the Street of Silk was visited by men of the Watch not in their cloaks. They asked after a girl and her mother, the girl a babe. They departed without their answer. Near midnight, other men, but not of the watch, though they wore swords with the ease of those who have forgotten their balance without them, went to a riverside cot whose door had been trued only last spring. An infant lived there once. This morning she does not. The quiet in the room hardened like cooling metal. Eddard felt it in his jaw before he felt it in his heart. "Robert's get," he said flatly. "A poor carpenter's pride," Varys murmured. "A little gold thread in the ragged weaving of the city. Who gave those orders?" "The city has many hands," Varys said with mild regret. "Some of them belong to men who do not wear rings." "Find me who does," Eddard said, and was already moving, the ache in his leg forgotten in the straightening of his spine. "Send Tomard and Jax with a litter to the Street of Silk. If the watch reaches those doors again, they will find the hand standing in their way." "Ah," Varys said, "shall I also send you a mirror, so you may see what your face looks like when it turns to iron?" "Send me Sandor Clegane," Eddard answered. "He knows how to keep a crowd out of a room with his shoulders alone." An hour later, the Street of Silk gave up its sweet and stale perfume to the stink of the river as Eddard's litter shouldered through a knot of gawkers pretending not to be. The brothel's door had been barred. The woman who opened it had a face that had learned long ago how to make any expression it needed. When she saw who stood beyond the hound's dark bulk, her practiced smile faltered to something truer. "My Lord Hand," she said, and swept a courtesy with a flourish that did not reach her eyes. "What business brings a northern winter to a warm house at breakfast?" "Your guest," Eddard said, "the girl and her child." The woman's gaze flicked past Eddard to Sandor and back, to Tomard, to the 2 gold cloaks Varys had quietly sent to be seen to be loyal. She hesitated only a heartbeat too long before she yielded the door and led them through rooms where cheap lace pretended to be expensive and a little boy with a mop stopped to stare at the hound as if staring might be an art. They found Mhagan in a chamber no lady would countenance, its walls papered with sprites once meant to look merry and now only faded. She had a bruise blooming at her jaw and the wild gaze of a bitch who does not know what to do without her pup. Her hands opened and closed at her sides like creatures drowning. "Gone," she said when she saw Eddard, and her voice was a rattle at the end of a chain. "They came with knives and—" She was sleeping. Eddard stood very still and heard behind her words the one sound that mattered and would not be heard again. For a moment the world narrowed until it was only the size of a child's mouth. Then the moment passed and he stepped toward her slowly, as a man must approach a horse that will kick. "Who?" he asked. "Men with their cloaks off," she said. "Men who did not look at me when I screamed in their faces. Men who could not hear." Sandor turned his head, so the light caught the old ruin of his cheek. He was watching Eddard out of the good eye like a hawk. "Do you want the names?" he asked with a terrible practical patience. "If they were watch lads, the watch knows its own. If they were not, the streets know the taste of their boots." "I want the child," Eddard said softly. The silence was its own answer. He bowed his head just enough to be a man among grief rather than above it. "I will find who sent them," he told Mhagan in a voice that did not promise much and therefore promised everything. "And I will put that man under law. Do you understand me? Not knives in the dark. Law." She looked at him with a hatred that was not for him and finally dipped her head once, barely, as if yielding to gravity. He left Sandor at the door with 2 of his own, and when he reached the street again, the hound fell in at his side without being called, and Eddard found that he was glad of the man's company. The city's eyes followed them like flies. Somewhere a woman laughed. Somewhere a gull complained like a child denied. Back at the Red Keep, he sent for Janosslint. The Lord Commander of the city watch arrived with dust still at his hem and gold in his smile. He bowed as if those muscles hurt him. "My Lord Hand," he said jovially, "how can the watch keep your peace this morning?" "You can begin," Eddard said evenly, "by telling me which of your men took a child from her mother's bed last night." Janos's joviality slid away like grease into a gutter. "The watch does not, dirty its hands in private matters, M. Lord. We are for the king's peace." Mother's beds are for other. Do not, Eddard said softly, and the softness was the thing that made Slint stop talking. The hand leaned his knuckles against the table. The wood accepted his weight. Do not lie to me in my own house. You will bring me the names of every man who left the barracks last night without his cloak. You will bring me the name of the officer who signed the leave. You will bring me any man who returned with blood on his boot. And you will bring me the man who told them to go. Janos shifted, his eyes slipping once, involuntarily, toward the chair near the window where Petyr Baelish sometimes sat and smiled as if he had invented pleasure. The chair was empty. Slint swallowed and smiled again, smaller. As you say, he muttered. We do not tolerate. You tolerate gold, Eddard said. You will bring me names, Lord Janos. If you bring me lies, I will pull them like weeds and show the route to the city. When Slint had gone, Sandor let out a breath and made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You frighten him, he observed. Then let him give me reason to be kinder, Eddard said. He had not yet finished when a second visitor came, the night's watch in black straw hat and road dust. His beard a salt and pepper bristle, his eyes as patient as stones that had been rained on too often. Yoren bowed, awkward with stiffness from the saddle. I'll be plain, Lord, Yoren said when they had beer between them and the door shut. Crow's work takes me through alleys men don't look at unless they need a quick piss. Lot of ears in them alleys. Some of those ears heard you'd come to Silk to stand at a door, and some heard there's other doors that won't wait, and some of them know boys who don't want to be in the city when men start deciding names. I've got leave to take a few extra for the road north if they choose it. A smith lad Tobo Mott doesn't want put to a sword for his blood. Say, if a man in your place had a mind to see a boy out of harm's way without making a noise about it, the wall's a place as good as any for a boy to be hid inside his own breath. Eddard looked at him a very long time and felt some tea. Like grace in the ugliness of the day. Gendry, he said quietly, giving the smith's name to the boy for the first time in a room that could hold the weight. He is to go with you, and he is to tell no one his father's name. And if anyone asks you whose protection he is under, you may say, the law and nothing more. Law? Yoren said, scratching at his beard. I like the sound of that. It don't shout. Boys walk easier under words that don't shout. Take coin, Eddard said, drawing a pouch. None of my men will walk with you. You will walk how the Night's Watch walks. And if you happen to pass a door where a girl and her mother need a new place to sleep, you will scratch twice and wait for another scratch back before you knock. Yoren nodded once, grave as a priest. He said, I know that door. Might be I know too. When Yoren had gone, Eddard sat a long time and watched the light move along the wall where someone had laid paint years ago in a pattern meant to look like a vine. It looked like a snake to him. He thought of law and knives and how both cut, and of how one made a man bleed where everyone could see and the other where no one could. Stannis's letter spread under the city like dye in water. Some men pretended they did not notice their cups turning faintly red. Others lifted their cups and peered grimly through the color at the shape of their own mouths. The small council sat at the long table with bowls of pears between them. Petyr Baelish toyed with the stem of his fruit as if it were an idea. Pycelle droned, listing lists until the lists themselves grew sleepy. Varys made little tents of his fingers and hid beneath them. We must starve Renly, Cersei said. Roses grow pretty in spring, but they die with their roots in water if the water goes brackish. Send word to the granaries. The Reach sends grain through 3 houses that take their share. Find other houses. Find men in Dorne who have grain and gold and not much to do with either. By a year if you can. By a month if you cannot. You would trade with Dorne, Petyr observed. If we were court poets, I might write a song about the lioness who ate the viper's egg. You would write a song if a dog pissed, Cersei said. Let the vipers hiss if it fills our bellies. Eddard said, we will buy everything we can put in a barn bigger than a mouse, and we will lower the price of bread 3 coppers and raise the levy on dice another 2. It will make the men in alehouses curse and their wives bless us for the cost of bread. Petyr rolled the pear between finger and thumb. Steal from their play to sweeten their food, he murmured. How pious. If only the gods kept better accounts. The gods remember who is hungry, Varys said dreamily. If we must choose between riots and dice players complaining, I am fond of dice players' complaints. They are so inventive. Cersei's mouth tilted. Lower the price of bread, she said. Let men say the queen is merciful and the hand prudent. I would like to hear that music. Petyr's eyes glinted. The faith might be persuaded to sing it, he said, with a certain oiling of throats. The High Septon has discovered late in life how to faint when his plate grows light. Then take a purse, Eddard said, and take none of it to your own. Petyr put a hand to his heart in a mimicry of affront so mild it was insolent. My lord hand wounds me, he breathed. I am not cut from cheap cloth. When the council adjourned, Eddard did not go back to the Solar. He took the long way round to the sept that had never yet owned his knees. The air in the sept was cooler than the day deserved, and full of the herb smoke that made one think of furs even when none were present. The High Septon accepted him in a side chapel where 7 colors of light made a rainbow on the stone floor, and bowed with a generosity that had calculation in it like a perfume's undertaste. My lord hand, croaked the fat man, wiping his brow though the day was not so hot within. The god's house is for all, yet how it prospers when visited by those whom the gods have made prosperous. I have come for bread, Eddard said, ignoring the compliment. The High Septon blinked owlishly. I have come, the hand continued, to ask you to bless the lowering of a price and to announce it as if it were mercy from the mother rather than a calculation from my table. I do not ask you to lie. I ask you to select your truth. A delicate distinction, the Septon murmured. Yet with the right choir, a distinction can become a hymn. What gift do you bring the gods, Lord Stark, that they might hear your request over the others? They have ears in this city. They are overloaded. Less blood on the cobbles in the next fortnight than more, Eddard said. The High Septon looked at him and discovered in the gray of the hand's eyes that he told the truth when he did not need to. Yes, the old man said finally. Yes, let the mother be merciful and the father just, and the hand's ledger a holy thing for a day. The sept's bells spoke the news of reduction and mercy in 100 bronze throats. By dusk, women were lining for bread, their mouths tight with suspicion, then opening with a quiet relief that sounded like wind under a door. A gambler cursed and paid an extra copper on his winnings and did not punch anyone for the price. Men filled their cups and spoke of kings with more certainty than knowledge, but fewer fights found purchase in the words. Eddard went to his window when night learned itself and watched torches wander in the streets like drunken stars. He slept a little and dreamt he was a boy on a hill of barley that was all of Winterfell and none of it, and that a red fox darted through the stalks with a grin too human. At Bitterbridge, banners hung from gallery to rail like a garden's delirium. Men drank themselves to courage and then to foolishness and then to songs. Renly Baratheon walked among them as if among courtiers in a warm hall, the night's soft heat gilding him. The Knight of Flowers walked at his shoulder with a grace men forgave because they loved looking at it. Marjorie Tyrell sat with a calm that would have frightened a less clever girl. Her eyes were on the men with ledgers more often than on those with swords. They love you, Loras said to Renly, easy with his hand on a rail. They love you because you look the way they think a king should. Renly laughed, unashamed. Then God save them from the day I wake ugly. You will never wake ugly, Loras returned, and the way he said it made a jest a vow. The reach is yours. My father cannot say no to a parade. He does not say no to you, Marjorie said, and men were always a little surprised to hear how low and sure her voice was. He will never say no to me if I bring him a crown and an insured harvest. He might say not yet, but he will not say no. Renly twined his fingers together and considered them as if they were another lord he had to convince. Not yet, he repeated. And in the city? In the city, Marjorie said. They have a queen who knows exactly what their bellies look like when they are empty, and a hand who is learning quicker than you think. They will not starve quick enough for you to be their meal. Renly smiled. "Then we march," he said. "We march not to starve them, but to remind them that some bellies in the world are never empty. We show them green. We show them men who will die for it," Loras said softly, not as a warning or a plea, simply putting the weight of it onto the table. Renly's eyes went briefly distant and then returned. He had never been a man who denied reality. He had simply liked the scent he put on it. He wrote a letter that night and gave it a signet he had never worn before. It was a letter with the tone of a younger brother asking an older to recognize that the world had changed for the better. It was addressed to Eddard Stark. On Dragonstone, wind clawed at stone, and the sea spoke in its hard, ungenerous tongue. Davos Seaworth stood on a promontory where the rock under his boots looked like the back of some old black beast turned to salt. He could taste ash in the air already, though the pyres had not yet been lit. The men of Stannis Baratheon's household moved with the quiet that belonged to men who cared more for function than for ceremony. They positioned the carved images of the Seven in a circle like a council of elders about to be told a difficult thing by a brisk child. "Ser Davos," Stannis said when he came, and Davos bowed in that lurching way of his one-eared head. "You do not approve." "I don't disapprove out loud," Davos said without guile. "I'm not fond of seeing gods burned, is all. They take it hard." "They are wood," Stannis said. "If they burn, they are wood, and men have been talking to wood, calling it father and mother and stranger and smith. If they do not burn, then I will listen to you call me a fool." Melisandre stood slightly apart, robed in smoke's colors that changed as the wind changed. Her hair looked like something Flame had remembered. When she spoke, it was in that soft cadence that made men think of a woman's hand smoothing. Not to comfort, necessarily, but to neaten. "The night is cold and full of eyes," she said. "Men call it other names to make it friendly. They must call things by their true name now. You ask wooden mouths for mercy. There is no mercy there. There is no mercy anywhere but in the fire." Davos did not argue with what he could not argue with. He turned his face to the sea and let it slap him with salt and old anger. Stannis's jaw worked. He turned his head slightly as if to hide emotion that might be mercy and said, not unkindly, "Go to the harbor. Count ships. We will need sails. We will need men who know how to climb them in bad weather." Davos went as he was told. He was good at going where he was told and seeing what he needed to see once he got there. When he looked back from the breakwater, the pyres were already beginning to be something that drew the eye. The carved faces of the Seven had the startled look of people in the first seconds of being burned. The wind took the smoke and pulled it out to sea like a secret someone had decided was finally worth telling. Celis watched with ecstasy that made Davos's gut turn. Shireen watched with a horrified fascination that made him want to find her a doll. Stannis watched like a man counting stones. When the fire was highest, Melisandre began to sing, and Davos, despite himself, felt his spine prick. The words were a language a man could not quite learn but understood too well. The letter Stannis sent afterward was colder than the ashes. It went to lords who had never expected to hear from him first in their lives. It said there was only one king and that his name was Stannis Baratheon. It said the law was not a carpet that could be beaten clean of inconvenience. It said bastards should not sit on thrones. It wrote his own name as if carving, each letter an etching. The letter reached King's Landing with all the speed of a wound finding a vein. In the hall that afternoon, a boy with a bad leg brought it on a cushion. Joffrey took it with a flourish and tossed it to his mother, laughing as if he had caught a fly and would pull its wings off for amusement later. "Read," he commanded, and Cersei's mouth moved and did not. She handed it to Pycelle. The old man's lips trembled as he shaped the words. When he spoke the word bastard, the hall breathed in and did not let the breath out until he had finished. Silence hung like a broken branch, waiting to fall on someone's head. Joffrey snarled when he understood enough of the meaning to be angered. "I'll show him bastard," he cried, and his voice cracked like a boy's. He pushed himself up from the throne and would have leapt down all the steps if the hound had not moved with unshowy speed to be there. A step below, a hand half raised, not touching, simply an impediment. Eddard stood, and he did not look at Cersei, and he did not look at the boy, and he did not look at the men gathered like winter's birds along the walls. He looked at the space the words had made, and he walked into it. "The law," he said, quiet and even, as if saying grace in a place where grace might still be served. "The law will answer the Lord of Dragonstone. We will place the boy's name and his father's name before the gods. We will let them judge the words because men would judge with knives." Cersei's head turned, just a fraction. She wanted to kill him with her stare. She wanted, he thought, to kiss him for being what she despised. "The law," she said, with contempt and a strange, brittle longing. In private, after, she came to him with Lancel a shadow at her back like the memory of wine. "You will not convene a council of the faith to discuss my son's bedding," she said, very soft. "You will not drag my name through a September. Do you hear me, Stark?" "I hear you," he said. "I have daughters." "Then keep them safe," she said. And for a heartbeat he saw her as a woman who had once been a girl in a cold man's house, and then she was a queen again. "Keep them safe by keeping your mouth bloody well shut." He did not answer. There were times when silence felt like a prayer. There were times when it felt like treason. He could not always tell which was which. Tyrion Lannister came into the city as if through the teeth of a smiling dog. He traveled with half a dozen men who had served their purse longer than their lords, with Bronn among them, long-limbed and loose and never entirely at rest. Tyrion's horse was small and sure-footed and more intelligent than some cousins of his. He rode through the Lion Gate where guards pretended not to notice what they noticed and into a city whose smell struck him in the face like an old joke told again. "Gods," he said cheerfully to no one, "I do enjoy a place where everyone hates everyone else. It makes for such honesty." Bronn scratched under his collar without embarrassment. "It makes for good pay," he said, as brisk as a weather report. Tyrion presented himself at court with an untidy bow and a half-sincere smile, and was brought to Eddard Stark in a solar with 2 chairs and a table like a chessboard without pieces. He liked Starks, he found, or at least he liked this one. Starks did not make him feel as if he were in a play with the lines already written. They made him feel as if he had walked onto the wrong stage and would have to improvise to survive, which he enjoyed. "Lord Stark," he said, lifting his hands as if to show he carried nothing. "No dagger, no trick worthy of a stage. My father sends his compliments, and a reminder that he owns half the river and that any man who would dam it will wake fishless." "Your father," Eddard said evenly, "sends letters at a prodigious rate, considering he has a country to keep from catching fire." Tyrion's eyes crinkled. "My father believes letters are water," he said. "You pour enough of them and eventually something you wish to grow will grow, and the rest of it will simply run into the sea. He has a sea he'd like to run certain things into. That's why I'm here. To see they run into the right sea," Eddard said. "To see they don't drown the wrong people," Tyrion replied, surprising himself with the strength of his own answer. "I like your daughters. One of them looked at me in a way I found bracing. The other didn't look at me at all. It was a kind of mercy." He smiled without malice. "I have a sister who will teach a boy to believe he is a god if it helps her go to sleep. I have a nephew who will grow into that godhood like a badly tailored shirt. You keep him from strangling himself with it, and I will make sure my father doesn't strangle you for trying." "An alliance," Eddard said, dry as winter. "My least favorite soup." Tyrion laughed aloud. "Lord Stark," he said, "I am the only dwarf my father has. Use me for what dwarfs are good for. We know how to wriggle where large men cannot." "Wriggle toward Janos Slint, then," Eddard said. "Find out which purse bought his eyes last night." Tyrion's face went briefly blank. It was a mask of a sort that he wore too seldom because he preferred people to see him coming. "Ah," he said, "someone has already learned to play a king's game with knives. How tedious. I will ask questions where men don't think questions belong." "Ask them of Littlefinger too," Eddard said, and saw Tyrion's smile turn fox-like. "I always do," the dwarf answered pleasantly. "Sansa's dog was a brown scrap that would never pull a sled. She carried it as if it were a goblet at a royal supper, careful not to spill it." She named it Blossom and threaded a ribbon at its neck and whispered to it in a voice she had not used since she was little. The queen bared her teeth at the sight and then covered them with a smile, and men mistook it for approval. Joffrey prodded the pup once with a boot when he thought the room not watching. Sansa saw and did not speak. The hound did speak, a rough cough that might have been laughter or warning, and Joffrey looked away, sulking. Arya, watching from the shadowed mouth of a passage she had no business in, saw all of it and clenched her hand so hard at her side that later she would discover half-moons in her skin. She took the dog that night to sleep under her blanket. Sansa came to find it and stood over Arya's pallet with eyes like a field under frost. They stared at one another, girls and sisters and not much of either, for long heartbeats. Then Sansa said very quietly, "Thank you," in a voice that made Arya angrier, and she shoved the scrap of dog into her sister's arms and rolled over and stared at the wall until the wall became a field of snow and she could breathe. Catelyn Tully reached Riverrun with hands chapped by wind and a heart that had become a bag for other people's stones. The sight of the Red Fork and the tumbling towers made her throat close. Hoster Tully lay on his bed with the smell of old rosewater about him and smiled with his eyes and barely with his mouth, as if smiling were more trouble than it had once been. Edmure paced. His temper had grown a bristle where a calm had been, and Catelyn did not blame him. The Riverlands had been gnawed at like old bone, and her family's name had been a meal for wolves and lions and whoever else was hungry. "Robb must not come south," she said into the first quiet when Edmure's rant had burned itself down to coals, and he stared at her as if she had laughed at a funeral. "He is our father's grandson," Edmure objected. "He is our sister's son. He is Winterfell. You would have him sit like an old woman with his embroidery while Lannister men." "I would have him live," she said sharply. "I would have him grow into his father's bones instead of be buried in them. The hand is still the hand. He asks quiet, and I will send him quiet. We can bloody a dozen Lannister noses and feel great pride, and still the city would swallow us and belch and we would have to live in the stink." Edmure's mouth worked. He had always hated retreat more than defeat. Hoster closed his eyes and opened them with difficulty and rasped, "Your mother had that voice when the rains came. She made everyone feel petty for wanting to be dry." Catelyn went to him and touched his cheek with fingers that had comforted too many people to be good at comforting anymore. "There will be a time," she said very quietly, "for whatever we are owed. It is not now." She was not sure if she was promising or begging. In King's Landing, Renly's letter arrived with green wax and a scent that made Eddard think, unreasonably, of meadows. He read it and felt the quirk of fondness he had always felt for Robert's youngest brother, the boy who had laughed too easily and wanted someone to admire him, someone to talk to him as if he were more than a handsome cloak. He kept that fondness from his face when he read the words aloud to the council. "He asks us to acknowledge him," Eddard said. "He offers in exchange his army, his goodwill, and the Reach's bread. He suggests that if we do not acknowledge him, he will come and ask again with men at his back." "An effective persuasion," Petyr murmured, words laced with cavalry. "The Reach's bread." Varys breathed so softly the words were almost a sigh. That would be a hymn the small folk would learn quickly. Cersei's hand was very still on the table. "We have a king," she said. "We will not exchange him for another like a tradesman choosing a better goat. Send Renly a letter of thanks for his kind offer, and enclose with it nothing but air." "We could ask for a parley," Eddard said. The word felt wrong in his mouth, and yet it came. If only to look one another in the eye. Men who have looked in the eye sometimes remember before they strike. "Sometimes they see where to strike," Cersei returned. "Sometimes," Petyr added in a voice that made fun of no one and everyone, "they fall in love." Eddard glared, and Petyr smiled, altar boy innocent. "Renly will not come to speak terms, he has already decided," Cersei said. "He will come to receive fealty or to give battle. There is nothing in between that will satisfy his songs." Eddard thought of winter, which had satisfying songs of its own. He thought of the boys who would die if a man said yes or no wrongly. He thought of Littlefinger, who said yes and no both at once and took coins from people who did not notice their purses growing light. "Then we prepare the walls," he said, "and we keep the gates open for caravans from the south, so that men in the city will eat while they sharpen their tongues." Varys watched him with an expression that was not quite admiration and not quite pity. "You mean to keep a boy on a throne while two men who have never loved each other decide how to take it from him?" he said. "You mean to keep a city calm that has never been calm except when it was drunk. You mean to do these things with bread and letters." "Bread and letters," Eddard said. "And the watch, and the truth eventually." "Eventually," Petyr echoed dreamily. "Such a holy word. The gods must adore it. It absolves them of such work." The purge came again at dusk to a different alley, and this time the men found a door with a bar behind it and a hound leaning on a spear. Sandor did not use the spear. He used his voice and his half-face and the weight of his body, and the men went away and found a different alley with less of both. Later he stood at the mouth of the Hand's Passage with blood drying at the edges of his nails and looked at Eddard Stark without any flourish at all. "It will go on," he said. "You know that." "I know," Eddard answered. "Your law," Sandor said, as if testing the word in his mouth like a rough bit of bread. "It makes a sound. Men prefer sounds that are louder." "They will hear it," Eddard said. "If I have to make the whole city quiet for a day for them to hear it, they will hear it." Sandor's mouth quirked, and some demon in him that Eddard had never expected to understand looked out and nodded as if at a fellow soldier who kept his boots clean. "I'll make it quiet when you ask," he said. Arya's feet learned the city like a cat learns a house. She made a map in her mind where men drew none. A crack in a wall that let her listen to swordsmen boasting when they thought needing to boast meant they were brave. A stair added last year that no one used because it went to a dead end. A kitchen door that stuck unless you breathed on your hands first and touched it above the latch, where a nail bent wrong. Sirio taught her balance and attention and the use of stillness. The city taught her theft without stealing and the use of looking like you did not matter. She found, one day, a boy with black hair that fell in his eyes hammering at a bar of iron with a concentration she recognized. She watched him until he looked up. He stared without seeing her because his arm burned and his mind was elsewhere. She almost spoke. Then a Night's Watch crow came from the edge of her sight and spoke to him instead. She slipped away, feeling afterward that she had been a piece sliding on a board she could not see. Sansa sat with the queen and embroidered a song that would be sung badly no matter how well she stitched it. Cersei's needle flashed. Her fingers were deft. She looked at Sansa with that particular gaze that made the girl feel as if her mother had walked behind her and would never stop. "You did well at supper," Cersei said. "You did not speak unless he looked at you. That is wisdom dressed as modesty." Sansa lowered her eyes as she had learned to do. "He is very brave," she said. It was the kind of sentence that did that double duty she had learned from the queen. In one mouth it was praise, in another an accusation. Cersei laughed, a small, amused sound with a stone at its heart. "Brave," she said. "Men call many things bravery because they don't have a different word for doesn't know what he's doing and likes the feeling." Sansa pricked her finger and watched the drop of blood swell. "My lady mother," she said carefully, "taught me that bravery was doing what you must, even if it unmakes you." Cersei's glance slid, half a degree, toward the girl's face. "Your lady mother is a romantic," she said. "Is she beautiful?" "She is beautiful," Sansa said simply, and felt the unkindness of having said it so honestly when the queen's mouth tightened. Tyrion went to Janos Slint's quarters with a bottle and a smile and left with a list of names Slint had not meant to give anyone. He did not think those names were entirely true. He had not expected truth. He had expected names. He carried them to Littlefinger's counting house and found Petyr alone with an accounts book open to a page of things that were not numbers. "You knew," Tyrion said, closing the door with his foot and setting the bottle down as if it belonged there. "You sent them. You have the kind of mind that likes purges when the chance of profit is high and the chance of getting caught low." Petyr considered the dwarf with a blandness so polished it was like ice on a lake. "I know many things," he answered pleasantly. I also know that you like to speak to a man as if you know something more than he does. It makes you feel tall. We share this vice. You share the vice of sending men to kill children, Tyrion said, and his voice was not pleasant. You will not share it again. Petyr's lashes dipped. When they lifted, there was the barest wisp of a smile. You threaten me, Lannister? Tyrion stepped close enough that his breath might have been counted coin in the other man's face. I promise you, he said, if another child dies in this city because you wish to make a problem quieter, I will cut your smile off and make it a purse, and my father will fill it with the names of the men who will do it. They regarded one another, two small men with teeth that sometimes surprised taller ones. Petyr raised the bottle, poured, sipped. How very loyal of you, he murmured. To a king whose crown sits on your nephew's soft hair like a hawk set on a chick. Loyalty to children, Tyrion said, is the only loyalty that is never used against a man. Petyr's eyes moved as if to follow a thought down a well. We shall see, he said, and for once left a room first. The days became a rope by which the city pulled itself along. Renly's march began in earnest, the green tide rolling out of Bitterbridge along roads that did not yet mind their weight. Stannis' ships hoisted sail under a sky that seemed to frown at them for presumption. Dorne hid its thoughts and counted profits. The Vale remained a mountain where men could shout only to hear their own voices answer. Tywin sat and wrote, and when he did not write he ate, and when he did neither he listened like a vice. Beric Dondarrion, once a young lord with a sword too bright for his years, became a song with a new verse each week, a flame that would not quite go out, a name peasants used instead of prayer. Somewhere in the bowels of the city, a man hammered out the refrain of the song on a table and laughed until he wept. Eddard walked. He walked through the market at rushlight with two guards at his back who pretended to be tired and were not. He walked the walls, listening to the scrape of boots and the sigh of men who did not yet know whom they would be asked to kill. He walked into the kitchens and ate a piece of bread without sauce and praised the flour as if praise were a coin a man could keep in his pocket until his unlucky day. He walked into a school where children recited the names of kings and told the master to add one more name to the list. The bread that filled your bellies yesterday. The master gaped. The children laughed. He laughed with them a little because he could not bear to do otherwise. He walked to the mews where the ravens muttered and accepted the peck of a surly bird on his knuckle with a grunt and a patience he never remembered consciously learning. He thought of Benjen then and the wall and the big sky, and he knew, not guessed knew, that the life he had come to live here would be all fire if he let it, and that some part of him must remain snow or he would be made into something he could not recognize when he looked into glass. Night came with a rain that felt like a mercy after weeks of heat that had been a slow punishment. It drummed on slate, washed streets, made the city smell less like itself for an hour. Sansa stood with Blossom in her arms at a balcony slit, and for a moment she could pretend she smelled Winterfell, the rain there like a clean sheet. Arya stood 2 corridors away and listened to the sound on the stone and counted to 100 and back again and told herself a story about a wolf who had learned to drink rain without showing the shape of her neck. Cersei sat in a chair that must have been comfortable because she had chosen it, and Lancel poured wine and spilled an inch on the tile, and she did not flay him with words as she might have a month ago. She had begun to husband her angers the way men husband their coin in famine. Tyrion wrote to his father and did not send the letter. In it, he called his nephew an ass and his sister a storm that had lost respect for the house she tore at. He called Eddard Stark a man he would have chosen as his own ally if life had dealt him a different hand. He folded the parchment and burned it over a candle and watched the smoke ladder the air. Varys went home by 6 routes and spoke in 3 voices and heard more than any man liked to think was possible. He sat alone at a small table with a teacup and a sweet cake and looked like a boy who had stumbled by mistake into a rich man's house. He ate the sweet cake occluded with thought and did not notice when a crumb fell to the floor. A mouse took it. Men take what falls, he thought, and smiled, and did not know whether it was because the thought was comforting or because it was true. At dawn of a day that had no business being beautiful, Renly's outriders were sighted from the south. By noon, The dust from his van lay like a veil on the horizon. The city inhaled and did not let the breath out. The lanes at the fishmonger's square emptied of men who did not feel like selling fish under the eye of banners. The Red Keep's yard filled with armor's small noises, a music of buckles. Eddard stood with Ser Barristan Selmy under the old knight's awning of calm. "You have seen men come to walls before," he said. "I have seen men forget why walls are," Selmy answered. "They think walls are for glory. Walls are for wheat." "We have wheat," Eddard said. "For now," Selmy replied. Cersei demanded the boy be allowed to stand upon the battlements and show himself to the army, a symbol. Eddard refused, and the refusal cost them a day's quarrel that could have been two. In the end, Joffrey stood in a high window and waved at a city he imagined he commanded, and the army outside the walls saw nothing but glint and shadow and a rumor of a young face, which was enough for their songs and not much use for their bowstrings. Renly did not bring his full strength to throw at stone. He brought men to demonstrate that, if he wished to throw, he would not lack for arms. He sent a herald instead, liveried in green with a device men would learn to call a crown of roses, and the herald's voice carried like a clean trumpet. "Renly Baratheon, by the grace of men and banners," he cried, and someone above the gate snorted, and the herald did not falter. "Demands audience to discuss the realm's safety with the hand of the king. Bring him into the gatehouse," Eddard told the captain of the gate, and Cersei hissed at him, and he held his ground. They met between iron and air, on the narrow platform where archers leaned in peace and rested their chins and spat when no one thought to be offended. Renly's hair shone. His eyes were bright and earnest. He smiled at Eddard the way a younger brother smiles at a friend of his household come to teach him how to throw better. "Ned," he said, with that prodigal familiarity that would have made Eddard bristle if he had not, suddenly and absurdly, been moved by it. "Will you call me king, and let us be done with this piece of theater?" Eddard looked at him a long moment. "I will call you Renly," he said. "I will call you brother to my dead friend. I will call you brave. I will not call you king." Renly's smile did not collapse. It softened at the edges, as things soften when they see winter coming. "I thought you would say that," he admitted, and his honesty made Eddard want, against his better judgment, to like him more than he should. "Listen to me, then. The city likes bread. I can give them bread. The city likes a handsome boy. I can be that too. The city will tear the one you stand behind to pieces the moment he shows his teeth again." "The city," Eddard said, "likes what it is taught to like. I am not a singer. I am a father. I will keep the boys alive until a truth can be spoken that does not ruin them." Renly's mouth turned. "So you will wait for Stannis to come and take your head by law. If law will take my head, then law will put the right head in the right crown," Eddard said, and heard the winter in his voice and did not apologize for it. "And if I die keeping children breathing a little longer, Renly, it will be a better thing than living long and breaking them yourself." Renly's gaze flicked from Eddard's face to the city's skyline and back. The herald at his shoulder shifted, and somewhere behind them a horse pawed at stone. "You are a strange man," Renly said finally, with something like admiration and something like pity and something like annoyance. "I will not throw men at stone to knock you from behind it, not today. But I will not forget this talk either." "Do not," Eddard said. They parted with a nod no one saw but the two of them and their gods. Renly rode back to camp with his banners bobbing like a garden on the move. Cersei's fury arrived before the sound of hooves had faded. She flung it like a pitcher of scalding milk. "You give him the courtesy of a parley," she spat, "and you refuse my son the courtesy of being seen by his subjects. I begin to wonder who your king is, Stark." "My king is a boy," Eddard said. "I am trying to keep him alive. When he is a man and can keep himself, I will go north and let you have your court." "You will go to your grave," she said. "Perhaps," he answered, "but not today." That night he dreamed of Lyanna again, but not as she had been in fever. He dreamt her on a horse on a windy stubble field, her hair a dark flag, her laugh low. He woke that morning with the taste of a promise in his mouth and could not tell whether it had been made in a god's wood or a girl's yard. Sometime in the second week of Renly's garden camp, a fisherman on the Blackwater took coins to carry 3 men to a small cove below the city's walls. One of the men wore a hood low, one had a soldier's straight back, one had the look of a man who has no patience for disguises. They climbed and climbed, and when they reached the narrow postern where the hand seal turned quietly in old iron, they were admitted to a stair that would have made a better fall than a climb. Eddard met them in a little chamber that had once been used to keep salted fish. Stannis Baratheon did not enter so much as arrive. He brought the sea and an iron smell with him. Davos bowed. He did not look at Eddard long because he had heard tales about eyes like that which made him feel honest. The third man was tall and gaunt and wore his patience like a belt of thorns. "Lord Stark," Stannis said, without greeting, as if to pretend greeting would have been political. "You've kept a bastard on my brother's chair." "I have kept a child from being murdered in his bed," Eddard said. "It is not mutually exclusive, but it is unfortunate." "You should have spoken when Robert died," Stannis said. "You should have named me before your breath cooled. Now we have gardens under my walls and songs under my roof, and I am late to my own right." "You are late," Eddard said, and he made himself say what he had not wished to say aloud. "You are also hated." Stannis's mouth twitched as if biting something too tough. "Law does not ask to be loved." "No," Eddard said, "but it helps if the men who will die for it are not forced to pretend they do. Renly will not go away because you send him a well-worded letter. Joffrey will not vanish because you unwrap the silk around the truth. I am not telling you not to come. I am telling you that if you come today, we will have corpses on these stones that you will not wish to step on when you are old and your knees ache." Stannis' silence had a weight to it that Davos felt in his bones. The smuggler dared to speak because he sometimes could not help himself. "Lord," he said, "a man can lose his war by winning his first battle. I've seen men run at a wall and put a ladder on it without counting how many men they had holding the bottom." Stannis turned his head slowly, and something that might have been gratitude flashed across his eyes like the brief brightness of a fish. "You say I should wait," he said to Eddard, "while my brother plays at being adored and my nephew learns to enjoy being a god. I say you should send ships to watch his ships and men to count his men," Eddard said. "I say you should send another letter to every man you know, and in it you should put not your pride but your law, and you should ask those men if they want a world where every wife may be put aside for a fresher bed and every son turned into a mistake. I say you should meet me in the light and let me show you what the city will accept and what it will not, and I say you should accept some of it even though it will make you want to grind your teeth. And I say that if you come at my walls, I will put men on them who will do their duty, and we will both regret the day." Stannis stood as if carved. He did not like that this northern man made him feel like the sea when it found a stone it could not yet eat. Finally, he said with a kind of bleak resignation that was also strength, "Very well. I will wait." "Good," Eddard said, and Davos let himself breathe. Melisandre's absence in this secret meeting felt like a reprieve, and he did not question it. Stannis left as he come, his presence a blade. When they were gone, Eddard leaned his forehead against the cool of the old salt wall and allowed himself to feel how near he had come to something irreparable. He did not mistake the reprieve for a victory. He did not mistake anything for victory anymore. He went upstairs and found his daughters at breakfast, Sansa teaching Blossom not to beg at table with a gentleness that made his chest ache, Arya flicking crumbs with her thumbnail and trying not to be caught. He kissed both their heads. It was the only triumph he recognized. Days walked after days. The city learned how to be besieged by an army that did not yet besiege it, how to live under the weight of possibility. Men married in the sept with less song than usual and more food. The whorehouses did a quiet trade in comfort no one boasted about afterward. The bakers began to produce a kind of loaf that kept a day longer without growing sour. The goldcloaks learned to change shift without gathering in bunches where a garlic seller could count them. Then a thing small as a fallen mustard seed sprouted into something that would not be ignored. A man was found in the alley behind the Street of Lamps with his throat cut open like a pocket, and in that pocket was a scrap of parchment that said, in a crabbed hand, "A king is where a mother puts him." The man had no name anyone would claim. The parchment had no ink a maester could date. It was nothing. It was everything. Cersei carried it in her girdle for a day and touched it as a man touches a wound he cannot help reopening. Joffrey demanded to see it and then did not understand why everyone looked so grim. Eddard burned it after dark and watched the letters curl like insects in heat. Varys brought him news one morning that tasted like tin. "The mountain rides again," he said, as if he had ever dismounted. "Your young lord with the burning sword has become a ghost that will not lie down. Boys call his name before they throw stones at dogs. Lord Tywin writes that he does not know where his hound has gone, which means he has let the beast off leash to run where it likes best." Eddard's mouth went flat. "Send gold," he said. "Send it marked with the hand seal to the first village that will swear it saw Beric save a child from a Clegane man, and send it to the village where no one did. Let the tale grow." Varys tilted his head. "You will make a singer of him." "I will make a rumor that helps our bread," Eddard said. "If stories must be told, let them starve the men who would eat us." Tyrion arrived in Eddard's solar as if he had been poured there by a careless god. "My sister is planning to dismiss Barristan," he said without prologue, "because she has discovered a new hatred of old vows. She will say he is too old to lift a sword and that he cannot guard a boy who will not be guarded. She will replace him with a man I would not trust to guard the corpses in a plague house." Eddard stared. "Barristan Selmy," he said slowly, to be sure he had heard aright. "The same," Tyrion said. "Shall we prevent her? I am fond of old vows when the alternative is new cruelties." Eddard went to Cersei as a man goes to a well known to be dry and spoke to her with the full weight of winter in his voice for the first time in weeks. "If you cast aside honor," he said, "you will discover you needed it more than you thought. This is not a game you may replay. Ser Barristan is your boy's life, whether you like what he represents or not." Cersei's eyes flashed. "Honor," she said. "You have defended a lie for a month with such grace, Stark, that I sometimes wonder whose honor you keep, yours or mine." "I keep the city's life," he said. "I keep the boy's breath. Do not throw away a man whose name still means something to men who grew up when men were still expected to mean it." She did not relent. He saw her decision as one sees a stone roll. That afternoon in the hall, she stripped Barristan of his white cloak with words like knives and threw at him a little purse of coin as if to say that honor could be bought like a night's warm bed. Selmy's face went very still and very young. He laid the white on the floor and left it there. He unbelted his sword and left it too. When the door had closed on his back, Joffrey laughed very loudly, and the sound was so childlike in its effort to be wicked that something in Eddard's heart broke. He looked across the hall and saw Sandor Clegane's eyes narrow. He saw Sansa's knuckles go white around her dog. He saw Arya's lips move with a word she did not say. Afterward, outside, when the light had sharpened everything cruelly, Eddard found Barristan alone under an apple tree that had never borne much. The old knight looked at the leaves as if asking them if they remembered what leaves were for. He turned when Eddard's shadow touched him. "They gave me money," Selmy said, and in his voice was the bewilderment of a man who has been given stones where he had asked for water. "I have never known what to do with money." "Buy a horse," Eddard said. "Ride to the one man in the world who will not laugh at your vow." "Stannis," Barristan said, with a strange revelation dawning in him, like a child realizing he had always had a father. He straightened. "I will ride tonight." Eddard clasped his forearm, a soldier's grip. "Ride with my blessing," he said, "and tell him the city is not the enemy. Hunger is. Pride is." Selmy's mouth twitched. "Pride," he said. "A horse I have ridden often." He bowed and they almost made it an honor and went to pack the little he owned. On the third night after Selmy's departure, when the moon was a bitten coin and the air carried that tense feeling that precedes a storm that cannot make up its mind, Littlefinger came to Eddard with a smile too white. "I have done the errand you asked," he said. "I have found the names that Janos would not find, and I have found that one of them has a son who spends gold he should not have on wine he cannot hold." I have brought you the sun." He stepped aside, and a boy of 16 stood there with eyes that tried to be hard and had not yet learned the trick. He smelled faintly of cheap perfume in a way that made Eddard think of a dog that had been kicked too often and gone chasing the first hand that offered food. "Tell Lord Stark what you told me," Littlefinger cooed. The boy licked his lips. "We were told," he blurted, rushing the words to be rid of them. "We were told to do what was done." "Told by a man with a lion ring who was not a lord," he said, "but who walked like he knew how to step on other men's cloaks. Told by a man who said if we didn't do it, someone else would, and we might as well be the ones to have the coin." "A man with a lion's ring," Eddard said, his voice very low. "Describe him." The boy described Lancel Lannister without knowing his name. His hair, his posture, the silly carefulness of someone playing at being important and mistaking cruelty for it. Eddard closed his eyes a moment. When he opened them, Littlefinger's face was full of pity so perfect it could only be a mask. "Shall we arrest him, my lord?" Petyr asked gently. "Shall we storm into the queen's bedchamber and pluck the boy from under her skirts? Shall we make a public washing of this dirty cloth? Imagine the smell. Imagine the hands. Imagine the mouths." Eddard felt cold. "No," he said. "The boy will go to the wall." Littlefinger blinked. "The boy will put on black and pray every morning for the rest of his small life that no mother in the world will have a child torn from her, while men with lion rings learn to drink wine without spilling it," Eddard said. "And the man with the lion ring will find his bed moved and his cup emptied and his hand beaten with a stick every time he reaches for something not his, and he will weep, and I will not watch." Petyr watched him as if he had discovered a new beast. "You are going to make a city out of a winter fable," he said, and for the first time there was a thread of awe in his derision. "I am going to keep the children alive," Eddard said. Somewhere far downriver, a small skiff carried Barristan Selmies straight back into the fog. Somewhere nearer, Yoren walked with a file of boys that grew by the day, none of them kings and all of them looking more and more like men the longer they walked. One of them carried a hammered helm with bull's horns in his bundle. When he slept, he dreamed of a river he had never seen running black under a moon. When he woke, he kept walking north. Renly's camp drew closer with the predictability of growing grass. Stannis's ships multiplied like crows by a carcass. The city honed itself not to a blade, that would have been too proud, but to an edge hidden in humble things. A gate's hinge oiled, a baker's storehouse tallied, a knife hammered without a name scratched on it. The small folk spoke less and listened more. The nobility spoke more and heard less. Songs took on a harshness that made them better, in a way truer to the air they rose through. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace's stone sighed and even mice grew weary of their mischief, Eddard sat with his back against the cold wall near his window and held the weight of what he had chosen. He looked out, past the black lace of rooftops, to the pale line where the sea was thinking about day. He thought of Robert as a boy and as a man and as a body lifted with the carefulness men reserve for kings and wounded dogs. He thought of Lyanna's laugh. He thought of his daughter's hair, the two different browns, one burnished, one wild. He thought of a boy he did not father and had fathered anyway because no one else had been willing to do the work. He rose stiffly and went to the table and took up the quill again. He wrote, on a small piece of parchment not meant to be seen by any hand but his, the names of those he would not let die if he could help it. There were 10 names and then 12, and then he stopped because a man could paralyze himself with love. He folded the paper and tucked it in the hollow behind a brick, an old mason's pocket. He could not put the world there. He could put a promise. Against the window the day began as a pale smear. The first gull cried. A cartwheel creaked below, the sound absurdly hopeful. The city inhaled to start another day. And beyond it, at the edge of sight, banners waited for wind.